The use of the desktop as a visual canvas has increased in the last number of years, not only in the form of the desktop documentary, but also for more narrative-based projects. The spatial and temporal specificity of the computer screen provides the perfect lens through which filmmakers can experiment with contemporary concerns. Lisa Akervall has discussed the use of multi-perspectival devices in film as an expression of our current audiovisual landscape, which is based upon the proliferation of mobile screens, which themselves use fractal interfaces combining both human and mechanical gazes. More than ever, such screens are also the sites through which we engage in networked communication. This is also the subject of discussion in Tony Zhao's video essay, A Brief Look at Texting in the Internet and Film. As we can see, this problem is already being dealt with in Hollywood and big-budget international productions. These examples show how some of the most enduring filmmaking practices, such as the shot-reverse shot, which is long-mediated communication between characters on and off-screen, is being replaced by temporal simultaneity, in which the characters and the viewers receive key narrative information in real time from frames embedded in the screen. Here Zhao suggests that we have ceased attempting to visualize networks in the internet, a moment of fascination particularly among directors of Asian and American science fiction in the 90s and early 2000s. Instead, contemporary texts attempt to visualize the experience of using such networks, making this a question of subjectivity. Critics of post-cinematic subjectivity, like Beth Coleman, argue that as media become more pervasive, the categories of subject and object become more porous in these online network spaces. It is this shift in power and agency, associated with pervasive mediation, that such desktop narratives investigate. Taking all of this into account, here's Holly Herndon's music video for Chorus. The song itself is constructed from audio samples compiled from 2 weeks of internet browsing. While the Akihito Taniguchi directed video could not be described as a straight desktop film, it takes samples from a host of different media content to create its own composition, much like the song itself. This moves from camera footage to the webcam embedded in the desktop, until the perspective separates itself from the screen and floats around 3D renderings of people's physical desktops, where such interaction with devices occurs. As the mediation accelerates, so too does the distortion of the media itself, with 3D renderings that are only partially constructed. This degradation creates a sense of unease or suspicion in the viewer. This is Herndon's aim, who acknowledges the influence of the then recent NSA surveillance scandal in the work. Therefore, these spaces appear both as comfortable nests and sites of vulnerability and suspicion, as the individuals using these devices are subject to imperceptible surveillance. The workspace which house these devices are both neat and messy, filled with consumer items that explode onto the screen. Just like the desktop images which are populated with personal files, these spaces are lived in. The cacophony of consumer items and personal files are equated in a sense, as they construct the identities of those users who are absent from the screen. Considering the emphasis on surveillance, this first appears to be a critique of data mining and the subject-object collision, but it might also be the answer. Beth Coleman argues that the only treatment for mediation is more mediation, through a new kind of embodiment in which we can claim these spaces back. By mediating sites of engagement, Herndon and Taniguchi construct a very human presence from the mimetic traces left behind by digital media. This is presented by creating a literal subject position of a human user moving around their physical desktop. Another film to deal explicitly with the conflation of subject and object is Noah. Taking place entirely over a desktop, Noah tells a very traditional story of a young romance which turns sour after the protagonist suspects his girlfriend might be cheating. This investigative work is done by piecing together tidbits of information from social media sites, creating a network of deceit and suspicion. Noah finds novel ways to rewrite traditional filmmaking codes. For example, as Noah logs onto his computer, the screensaver is a picture of him and his girlfriend, providing shorthand narrative exposition for what will follow. This detective work happens in real time, meaning the viewer constructs the plot alongside our protagonist. It also requires that the viewer is familiar with social media sites, and the social protocols and distinctions between comment sections and private messages. In another way, however, the film is quite traditional. Using the tenets of the filmic narrator, important narrative information is almost always framed using a zooming technique. However, this also corresponds to Noah's eye, meaning the narration is refracted through his subjective position as narrator. Furthermore, the presence of a human user is granted to us through the extra diegetic key tapping that alludes to an outside of the screen. His psychology is further fleshed out using a soundtrack which comprises of songs from his Cuddle Jams playlist.
Feels like I'm standing on a timeless tree.
Issues around online privacy play out on a micro level here, as the information Noah gathers from a selection of data may or may not actually prove that his girlfriend is cheating, and we never find out if he was correct in believing she was. Therefore, the film condemns the inability to separate objects of data from the human subjects who generate them. This inability to separate subject and object is also expressed textually, in that Noah's voice becomes part of the interface through which the narrative unfolds.
I was just looking at these.
Similarly, the only time which we see our protagonist is as a random participant in a webcam chat room. This chat roulette segment also acts as the film's version of the unmediated encounter, as Noah speaks with the most honesty when he's no online persona to hide behind.
It's like, what, is this a popularity contest? Whose grandma's gonna get more likes?
Yeah. I can get pretty neurotic. I tend to overanalyze things. So let's say some guy comments or likes my girlfriend's display picture. It's like, back off, man. You know what I mean?
I know, it just makes people so crazy. Like, it's mad.
Transitioning from the micro to the macro, we have a film like Kevin B. Lee's desktop documentary Transformers the Pre-Make. Figured as an attempt to construct Transformers' Age of Extinction before its official release from crowdsourced material, the documentary evolves into a critique of systems of geopolitical power. Lee's film offers us a literal top-down view of the globalized culture industry, using Google Maps to connect global production locations. Hito's style suggests that a new top-down system of power, in which communities are divided up, is dependent on a visual regime of vertical perspective, as represented by drone strikes and surveillance technologies. Hence, the category of subject and object can be thought of in socio-economic terms, as a one-way gaze of superiors and inferiors. This is represented in the pre-make on a number of fronts. By utilising poor quality images taken by bystanders on set and suggestively placing it alongside articles and crowdsourcing labour, Lee suggests that this poor economy of images is being utilised as promotional material for the film, thereby confusing the categories of employee and consumer as much as producer and consumer. With the absence of voiceover, much of this critique is dependent on juxtaposition. As a result, multi-perspectivity takes on a political dimension similar to dialectic editing practices in Marxist cinema, with competing narratives embedded in the same screen. This is particularly evident when the film deals with the issue of regional tax breaks to attract film production companies.
Only benefits Hollywood. I have a few friends here who beg to differ. What it's really about is jobs. Over 6,000 in the past 2 years alone. It's about people who dream of living and working in their home state, who we can't afford to lose.
By contrasting the whitewashed advertisement with images of a low-income black neighbourhood who will ultimately be affected by such tax breaks, Lee not only deals with economic issues, but also the issue of racism in mainstream media.
For all of us, the Michigan Film Tax Credit. Keep it rolling.
The international production of Transformers 4 also gives way to an examination of networked and globalised power. As Lee informs us, the film entered into a co-production deal with a Chinese company in order to evade China's international film quota. This has particular impact on the Chinese working class, as the use of public space by the international corporation directly affects their businesses and livelihoods, offering a comparison to the people of Chicago earlier in the film. Sometimes these cross-cultural comparisons can also provide their own satirical impulse. Allusions to China's censorship of video sharing sites also work in conjunction with video removals from YouTube, which Lee stumbles upon in the construction of the documentary. This poses questions about control over technology and the basic access of information itself along the social strata. Ultimately, the film, in its networking of information through internet sources and Google Maps, could be considered what Patrick Jacoda calls a network aesthetics. Here the screen acts as an investigative tool, but also as a visual representation of a much larger network of globalized power and top-down structural inequality. In all three cases, multi-perspectival devices and network communication are used to examine the subject-object relationship, but from differing angles. The pre-make is by far the most overtly political, even espousing a message of resistance through its networking of dispersed narratives. Here the subject-object formulation is transfigured to examine structural socio-economic issues. Again, this division is porous, as the supposed producers of poor image content become co-opted into a larger system of cultural consumption, therefore moving from subject to object. This contrasts to Noah, which uses a traditional romance plot as an allegory for systems of surveillance, ultimately rejecting mediation and the inability to separate subject and object. Issues around privacy also come to the fore in Chorus. However, Herndon is of the view that by constructing a new subject position from the mimetic traces left behind by digital media, these sites of engagement can be reclaimed. While Chorus and Transformers the Pre-Make take an affirmative stance on hypermediation as a political tool of resistance, Noah seems to support the complete opposite, despite its medium of choice.